I've given you a handout, and I'm not a big fan of using up paper, but this is the case where the paper is really quite useful to have in front of you as you are writing. I'm never one to want to look at a screen and try to be looking at something else on the screen when I'm supposed to be writing on the screen. It's just too much. So for this, I like to have the paper in front of me to refer to. There are a lot of useful tools inside the packet. So our objective today is to learn the key steps in writing common interims. And as we're doing so, we're going to talk about the standards of significance and how to choose standards of significance specifically for the common interims. We will learn how to develop an assessment blueprint and use the depth of knowledge to assess different levels of rigor in the questions that you're asking. And then ultimately to be able to create parallel assessments. As you know, our common interims are designed to mirror each other. So it doesn't matter what order you give them in, because they're designed based on some standards of significance for that particular course. So it shouldn't matter which one you give first. So, as you know, and I think everyone has access to the Curriculum Writing 2019 folder that is on the SharePoint. I think I've added you. If I haven't added you, I'll add you before we get too far, because there's some things I'm going to want you to do in there. Okay? One of the important things is our timeline. Our timeline's a little different than it was last year. We're starting a little earlier. We hope to be able to finish a little earlier, so we're not crunched for time at the, in August, right before school is starting, and everybody has everything else they'd like to do, like go sit on the beach before we welcome children back to school. So, that said, we are in this phase now. We are professional development for writers. As soon as you're done with both parts of the professional development, you are free to write. You will have everything you need to get started, okay? And then there'll be some times where both Dr. Howard and I will be available for receiving questions, answering whatever you want to do it in person, do it by Skype, on the phone, however you want to do that. But one of the important things is to make sure you're looking at that timeline so you can sort of keep pace. Now, one of the ways you're going to work to keep pace to meet these expectations in terms of deadlines is with your work plan. The work plan is a document. It is in that SharePoint folder. And in the SharePoint folder, there is the timeline. The work plan is something you'll develop with your co-writer, if you have a co-writer for a course. You'll figure out, again, we're just generally mapping out times when you're going to do certain things so that, you're beginning with the end in mind. We want to meet this target date to finish the curriculum. We want to meet this target date to finish the interims. Let's figure out how we're going to get there. So that's what that work plan is for. It's not one of those things where, oh my gosh, they didn't meet the deadline, forget it, all bets are off, unless it's, if we're hitting August, that's a problem. Anytime before that, we can work with you on adjusting your deadlines. We just want to make sure that you're successful in your writing and that you've actually mapped out a plan for how you're going to get it done. Because everything else in the world will become important, really, really important, in front of curriculum writing, because those are the things that are going to be right in front of you. Your students' need, your family needs, whatever you need, a day off, a day break, whatever. We just want to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page about what the expectations are and how you're going to meet them. Okay? So those two documents are in the Curriculum Writing 2019 folder. They are also
what's the main SharePoint?
Academics and Family Services. Academics-Family Services. So if you are logged into Office 365, you can click on the waffle. It will give you all the apps in Office 365. In there's an icon for SharePoint. If you go in SharePoint, you can search for Academics-Family Services. If you cannot see, especially for Ms. Watson, if you can't see the Curriculum Writing 2019 folder, then I just need to grant you access to it, that's all. Okay. We learned some things last year, and so we're controlling access a little differently this year so that you will have your own folder for your stuff. Most of what you see, it'll be read only until you get to your own folder, and you will have complete access to everything in it. Okay, so nobody can go in and move your document or change the template. It'll all be you. So if it messes up, it's all you. Okay, so why common interims? So one of the best ways that you can use your common interims is for you to know, as a teacher, what your students do and do not know. it's a formative assessment. If it's written well, it's going to cover really important stuff for your course because you decided that these are standards of significance that I am addressing. I want to make sure my students get before they leave this class. So at its core, it's really intended that a well-written common interim assessment will be a good formative assessment for you to know what your students do and do not know. It gives you an opportunity to work with teachers who are teaching the same course for you to talk about what your students collectively are learning or not learning. If you find out someone's done something really amazing in their classroom and their kids are really getting that standard, don't you want to know how they did it so that you can replicate that in some way so that your students get it too? Okay, so at its core, that's what the common interim is for. Now, the secondary piece, and this is the part that people tend to focus on, yeah, it's used for your type 2 growth measure for your performance evaluation. That is absolutely true. But you can use this same framework that we're going to develop for this common interim, you can use it for any assessment. All of this made me a better assessment writer, is actively thinking about what I'm asking and why. And that's the process we have to do as we're writing these common interims. What are you choosing to test students on and why? What level of rigor are you giving this information at? How are you asking students to respond to those standards? Those are the things we're after. And then the bonus is, it's written, you use it for your performance evaluation too. It's used for teacher evaluations, AP evaluations, the results of those scores. Okay? Because think about this. You're going to write a curriculum. You and somebody else probably is going to teach that curriculum, and then you're going to assess it. But the best place to be right here in terms of a student, if you've written it, you taught it that way, and you assess the students that way, that's the sweet spot. That's what we want to be able to give students. We want to be able to guarantee that by the end of the course, we expect them to have this information because we thought about it, we did it, and then we're assessing them on that stuff. Now, there's a whole lot of stuff out here that happens. And sometimes the assessed curriculum is really not quite what we thought we were doing. But if you're very intentional about your assessment writing, you're more likely to be in this area. You're more likely to be thinking actively about what you're teaching and when, because you said this is what was really important. Okay? Sweet spot. That's where we want to be. But the assessment, you should be thinking about that from the very beginning. How am I going to know if they learned this stuff that I said was really important for my curriculum? What am I going to do in my classroom to make sure that that's what I'm delivering? Begin with the end in mind. So, the common interim writing process. And so, all right, overview of the process. Well, get your curriculum stuff together. Spend a lot of time writing curriculum. And my materials, what I'm talking about, if I can have you turn to page 6 in your handout. One of the things that you will develop as you're writing your curriculum is a scope and sequence template. That scope and sequence template is one of the things that is important for identifying what are the most important pieces of this course. What are the most important standards of significance, you'll hear that a lot, that are important for this course that you want to make sure students get before they leave you. Okay? So, gathering up all your materials, maps, any resource materials, textbooks included, websites, whatever those materials are, they'll help you identify content and possible questions. You're going to identify 1 to 2 standards of significance, and they'll be based on that scope and sequence template. We'll come back to that in a moment. You'll write the first assessment and the first answer key. That's your foundation. From that very first assessment and that very first answer key, you're going to write what we call parallel assessments. So that it's not exactly the same question. They're similar questions. They have similar standard that the same standard that we're addressing. They have the same level of rigor that we asked the first time, but it's different. Okay, it's parallel. And then you will prepare the remaining answer keys. So 5 easy steps. Okay, get your stuff, identify the standard you want, write the first one. You wrote the first one, great. Write the second one and the third one and the fourth one. We'll talk about that as well. Okay, so you're not frantically taking notes. PowerPoint will be available for you as well. It'll be in the SharePoint, so no worries. All right, so what do you need? Scope and sequence template, okay? In this scope and sequence template, again, if you can refer to page 6, it's asking you course name, the writers, what school it's for. With the exception of like AP courses, generally they're going to be East-West courses or PMSA courses. AP courses, we're taking a different stand on there. They're AP courses, they're for the whole district, okay? So as you're doing this, major concepts. Great, tell me something about this unit. And then what standard is it addressing, and is it a standard of significance? And if you look at page 7, I've given you an example of a scope and sequence template that was written for a course last year. It was written for American Studies. It's an honors course that combines, it's an English course and social studies course wrapped up in one, okay? Major concept, first one, rhetorical analysis. They address 3 different standards in that major concept. One of them is a standard of significance for that particular concept. So you're using that scope and sequence template to help guide you in selecting the standards of significance that you're going to use just for the common interim. So they may have several different standards checked for their as standards of significance for the whole course, but only 1 or 2 of them is what's going to be used for the common interim itself. Okay? You're going to use your completed curriculum map and unit designs. Use all the material. You spend all that good time working on curriculum maps. You're going to use all that material along with your scope and sequence template to help guide you in thinking about what are the questions that I could be asking that fit the guidelines for the common interim. Okay? Your assessment items can come from, got a textbook publisher that's got stuff, they got a test bank, great, use it. They're good questions, use them. If they fit the bill for the expectations, use them. If there are other online resources that you have used in the past to help you to write questions for assessment, great, use them. Don't violate any copyright laws, but you can use those questions as a framework, for example, and that will make more sense as we start talking about making parallel items, okay? The other thing is that if you're in a core content area, this only helps you if you're in a core content area, English, math, science, social studies, there is a Certica item bank that's embedded in Mastery Connect. It will be those questions will be available for those who are in core content areas. There's really not much there outside of core content. But we'll do a PD for that as soon as we know kind of who's actually going to need that material, okay? So, step 1, get your stuff together. After you get your stuff together, you're selecting your standard of significance. Now, how do we do that? We're looking for things, standards that they go beyond this unit test. That's part of what makes it a standard of significance. It's something that's going to come up again and again. It may be something that leverages a student's knowledge or their skills outside of your discipline. It may be something that, hey, this is actually going to get them ready for the next course in the sequence, whatever that is. Okay? Those are the things you want to assess. There'll be other standards of significance, but pick the ones that have that endurance. Okay? Now, how many interims are you writing? It depends on your course. If it's a 1-semester course, you're going to write 3. If it's a full year course, you got a choice. You can write 5, and they're parallel, or we give the option for a year-long course to write 3 for first semester that address 1 to 2 standards, and then 3 for second semester that assess a different 1 to 2 standards. Totally writer's choice. I would recommend confer with anyone else who might be teaching this course at some point. What do they think is best given your content? A lot of the math teachers much prefer to have 2 standards for first semester, a different 2 standards for second semester. It really depends on your content, okay? And the agreement of your course colleagues about what they think will be best for that particular course, okay? Any questions about that? Yep.
Okay, can you go over that? So you said if it's a semester course, you're going to write 3 common interims?
3 common interims for beginning, middle, and end of the semester. You give those same 3 interims. If it's first semester, there are those 3 interims. Second semester, you're giving the same 3 interims. If it's a year-long course, you could do 3 and 3, or you can do 5 interims that are over the same 1 to 2 standards. Okay?
So year-long, 5.
Minimum 5, could do 6. So, designing the first assessment and preparing the first answer key. Turn with me to page 11. Page 11 in your handout. On page 11, you've got the schedule, so it sort of outlines what's required, 3 and 3, just 3, or a total of 5. But the design criteria are there. All common interims are going to be parallel assessments. They have to meet these requirements. They will address the same 1 to 2 standards of significance if they're parallel. So again, 3 and 3, 5, or 3 just for a semester course. They will all have between 12 and 15 multiple choice items. There will be 1 constructed response, some kind of short answer, and it has to meet some requirements as well. And then the final requirement for those items is they meet the right proportions for depth of knowledge. We'll spend a little time talking about depth of knowledge and some resources for helping you learn how to identify the right depth of knowledge. But DOK 1 is 30%, DOK 2 40%, and DOK 3 is 30%. Now that constructive response, because it is a constructive response and it is something that happens over a short period of time, it's going to be a DOK 3 item. Okay, because students are having to apply their knowledge to a situation. Okay, we'll talk a little more about that DOK in a moment. If in your interim you are incorporating some reading, some text, it can't be something that they've encountered in class. This is supposed to be brand new for everybody. So we've encountered some situations where, hey, teacher A is using this passage, teacher B is not using this, but teacher A is using this passage that's actually on the common interim. So now teacher A's students have seen it. This is maybe their 3rd time seeing it. That doesn't seem quite fair. So we want to make sure that all the students are on the same playing field, because again, we're trying to assess student growth. So all students need to be reading something for the very first time, okay? So if you're using text, it needs to be something that doesn't come up in your classroom. We have some guidelines for checking readability, what lexile level it's at, and that kind of thing. We'll make sure it's appropriate for the students that you have in front of you, okay? The constructive response is going to be the last item. So if you had 12 multiple choice, number 13 is going to be your constructive response. If you have 15 items, multiple choice items, number 16 is going to be your constructive response. Constructive response will always be the last thing on that assessment, okay? In addition, the constructive response, and this is something that has changed, started last year, we include a rubric for the students in the assessment. There was always a rubric included, but it was in the answer key, so the teachers knew things, but the students didn't always know. So we're including the rubric in the assessment for the students. There's a student version of the rubric. Now, when you get to the answer key, there's some guidelines for the answer key we'll talk about in just a minute, but one of the things is that rubric comes with, here are some possible great answers for this question, whatever it is, whatever that constructive response here. It has to contain these points, and it should follow along with the rubric. You've given the rubric to the students, the answer should also follow that rubric. Okay? Because think about this. You know what you have in mind when you write it, but the next teacher that teaches the course that wasn't involved in the writing also needs to know. So you want a very good answer as a part of that answer key for that person that was not involved in the writing. Okay? Last point on this page 11. No more than 1/3 of the points on the assessment can belong to the constructive response. In other words, your constructive response with this lovely, we'll say a little soft rubric, cannot be 90% of the test. That would be awful. Okay? Multiple choice is 2/3. Constructive response, not more than 1/3 of the total points. How you assign the points is totally up to you. If you want them multiple choice as 3 points apiece, you want them as 1 point apiece. Doesn't really matter, but no more than 1/3 of the points can belong to the constructive response. Yes.
So if your constructive response is 1/3, right?
Mm-hmm.
Use that. And he said that's DOK 3.
Yes.
Does that
But that's not about the points, it's about the number of items. So the DOK, it can be however many points, but it's still just one item.
Oh, so you still need 4 to 5 items.
You need 4 to 5 items.
Constructive response. I can't just say I'm done with the DOK 3.
Nope.
Constructive response.
Not at all.
Okay.
So if you had 4 DOK 3 items, one of them is going to belong to your constructive response, and the other 3 will be multiple choice. Okay?
So really, according to that, it's, has to be 13 questions, not 12.
Oh, minimum, yeah. But this is just multiple choice. 12 multiple choice, and number 13 will be constructive response.
Sorry.
Yep, that's okay. All right. Aha. Now, on the back side, there's a style sheet. Let me tell you a little bit about the style sheet. This is on page 12. The style sheet gives you some specifications in terms of the margins, the font that's used, and yes, there's a reason why Times New Roman size 12 is used. In previous years, we used either Helvetica or Arial or something, and you know, for math and science teachers, that doesn't work very well because a 1 looks just like an L. That's no good. So Times New Roman allows us to be a little more flexible to incorporate some of the challenges for all disciplines. In the header, you'll have the course name and which interim it is. Is it CIA, E, D, okay? And the student name. Items will be numbered 1 through, get to at least number 13, possibly 1 through 16. There will be 1.15 spacing. That is something you have to choose because the default is single spacing, more than likely. You will include lines for constructor response, and we'll look at an example that incorporates all of these ideas. And then there are some file naming guidelines, specifications, requirements. Please do it this way. There's a document that will be in your required documents folder that tells about the naming conventions. All of them include the year 2019, so we can at a glance tell when it was written. In previous years, we've sort of had to hunt for when that curriculum was written. So let's talk about the assessment itself. If we're addressing standards of significance, we want to make sure that the items that we're using on the assessment are actually assessing the standard, not the unit topic you happen to be on at the moment. So in this particular example, this is state goal 20. It's a PE standard, achieve and maintain a health-enhancing level of physical fitness based upon continual self-assessment. That's a good standard. We should all want to achieve and maintain a health-enhancing level of physical fitness. Thank you for walking those stairs. Look at number 1. What is it called when a player makes a volleyball save from a very difficult spike? Does that question address the standard?
I don't think so.
Not really.
No, not really. It's a great question for volleyball though, but it doesn't really address this state goal. This question, Shaylin wants to stay in shape. She also loves to play volleyball. Okay, great, we're in a volleyball unit, whatever. How could she use volleyball to stay in shape? Does that question address the standard or the topic of volleyball?
Standard.
The standard.
Definitely standards focus. So this is a difference, and we've seen this happen. There's some writers that take a moment to sort of to really grasp this. This is a question that is very much geared to the topic at hand. If we're not in the volleyball unit, or if this is the question that pops up before the volleyball unit, no one knows how to address this question. No one knows how to answer that because it's specifically about volleyball. It's about the topic. It's not about this standard. This is what we mean when we're talking about addressing the standard, not the topic at hand. We look at number 3. Which volleyball skill is the girl working on in the picture? I see heads going.
Serving, but it doesn't address it.
She's serving, that's great. It's about volleyball, but it's not about this standard about maintaining a health-enhancing level of physical fitness.
Right, it looks like
She's at, see, that little thing, that's supposed to be a ball, I think. I don't know.
She's look like she slammed dunk.
Well, there's
But
no
see,
spiking.
but what I'm hearing is language that's just about volleyball, not about this standard about physical fitness and self-assessment. In this question, in this picture, the girl is working on her vertical jump to use up for blocking In the game of volleyball, how could she use this activity to self-assess her fitness level? The language of the standard is in the question. Bonus.
Yep.
If the language of the standard is in the question, maybe that's the way we should be thinking about addressing some of those questions, okay? Using volleyball to stay in shape sounds like physical fitness, and staying in shape sounds like self-assessment. Okay? Is the standard actually addressed by the question? Okay? Not the unit topic. I'll be able to ask this question anytime in the year. All right, the DOK design criteria. We talked a little bit about this already. We're at a maximum of 16 items with your 15 multiple choice and 1 constructor response item. Okay? 30, 40, 30. And again, all of this is in your handout. It will be available on the SharePoint as well as the PowerPoint. So what do we mean by DOK? Depth of knowledge. Webb's depth of knowledge is really about complexity. It's not really about whether it's hard or easy, just how complex is the task you're asking someone to do. Are you asking them to play a scale? That's not very complex. You do have to have some knowledge. Not everyone can play a scale because not everybody has learned how to read music. So that's a step. That's an item that you could ask. But we would consider that less complex than playing an entire composition. We would consider playing an entire composition less complex than playing with a group of people who are playing the same composition, but they're playing different instruments, okay? So complexity, we're just talking about, again, not whether it's hard or easy, not so much that, because you can have a very hard thing that's not so complex, but it requires some thinking and knowledge. You could have a more complex task that's perhaps easier than some other things, but it's a series of steps that makes it complex. Okay, so it's not just the hard and easy. We compare this to Bloom, what we're talking about in this lower level, level 1, the recall and reproduction. This is the same places with Bloom with the knowledge and comprehension. Do you know the vocabulary that's important to this content area? Do you recall these facts? Do you recall these things that are connected to this standard? Can you figure it out easily? With DOK2, we're talking about skills and concepts. Can you apply those things that you learned? You got these basic things. Can you apply it now? And then DOK3, and this is where your constructive response is, as well as some multiple choice items, is strategic thinking. Can you analyze it? Can you put these things together? Can you put this knowledge? Can you apply it? Can you do it in a new situation? Haven't seen this one before. Great, that's more complex. Can you do it? That's the DOK3. It's more complex. Now, in your handout, I'm going to point you to...
Can you say that Webb's DOK gives equal complexity, like you said, and Bloom's gives us the vocabulary? Is that what you're saying?
No, what we're saying is this DOK1, this is the sort of the equivalent of Bloom's. You know, do you remember, do you understand the terms? Do you know what they mean? Okay, and it's not always just terms, but relatively simple task. Can you do this simple thing? Okay, that doesn't require a great deal of complex thinking. With DOK2, we're applying these things. We're taking this knowledge that we have and we're applying it. We're solving the math problem. We're not just defining what a hypotenuse is. We're going to identify hypotenuse now in a place that maybe we haven't done it before. Here, we're going to take the hypotenuse and we're going to do something else with it. It requires that we identify this hypotenuse in a new situation and this strategic thinking. Now, we're going to use this hypotenuse to figure out something else.
It's like DOK3, is it? Like
So that would be DOK3.
and very tippy top, is there a DOK4?
So there's a DOK4. This is extended thinking. So this isn't the kind of thing that we would see on a short assessment like this, but you might see in a project for your class. Something that requires students to do more in-depth thinking and analyzing for whatever their content is. Okay? All right. So let me point you to where there is more information on page 14 in your handout.
So Webb kind of builds upon Bloom's.
Yes.
He already knew about Bloom when he just kind of...
And that material, again, this is the guide you have. There's a website, there's a real link, there are videos, so if you feel like you need more, we're going to get some practice with this as well, and some other videos. One of the things I found most useful, I've also given to you. So if you will turn to page 23, and keep turning until you find your content area. Let's make you happy. This was my best friend when I was writing common interims. Because in these cognitive rigor matrices, and they're written for various content areas, so they're using words and phrases that you're likely to encounter in your own content area to help guide you to identifying DOK levels for questions that either you have written or someone else has written. Okay? So in here, again, this is just the most marvelous thing to have in front of you while you're working, okay? So I'm just going to ask you to leave that open to your content area, and we're going to look at some items, okay? So let's think about this easy, hard, and complex, because again, some people think that, hey, DOK 3 and that makes it hard, right? Not necessarily. Or DOK 1 and that automatically means it's an easy question, maybe, maybe not. They're not entirely equatable. So if we have as an item, we wouldn't, because it's not a multiple choice and that's not a good constructive response, use the word back in a sentence. You think that's easy or hard? Or is it complex?
Oh, just that's it. The easy.
You think it's easy? You think it's easy? Easy-ish?
Just use that word in the sentence.
I was gonna say, it would appear to be easy.
Like backwards.
It depends.
Or get back.
Yeah.
So meanings that a student needs to discern, right?
Back off.
Back off.
Yeah.
We've got some, so I will say it's easy-ish. I like easy-ish. It's not very complex though. Write a sentence. That's not a complex thing to do, but it's easy-ish. It's not entirely straightforward, okay?
You have to know what back means.
You have to know what back means in that context.
Well, you just need to know one definition of it.
Yes,
Any one you want, according to that.
but it's vague, right? It's vague.
It is vague, but right, but it just seems like.
At its core is just, hey, use the word back in a sentence. The student may think it's really easy and the teacher has something else in mind. Now suddenly the student gets it wrong because the teacher had something else in mind.
Oh, I didn't know.
Use the word posterior in a sentence.
That's harder.
That's a little harder. That depends on students' vocabulary, right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Provide examples of the word back used with different meanings and explain the difference in the meanings.
Easy-ish.
Now you're talking.
Easy-ish, but
It could
It's-
be complex.
it could be complex because now it's provide examples, which means they got to know what the word back is. Oh, used with different meanings. They got to think about, oh my gosh, what different meanings are there for the word back? And then you got to explain it.
Is that two?
What do you think?
Oh, here, so we look.
Do you think it's a DOK 1?
No.
No.
Okay.
Past one.
So we're to, and this is honestly where things get a little, is that a 2 or 3? That's where you'll spend most of your time thinking about. Is this really a DOK 2 or is it really a DOK 3?
So you're looking at this, how would we decide? So we're using your little thing, your chart here.
Mm-hmm.
And one says recall and reproduction.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see, skills and concepts. So are we kind of asking, is that the question we should be asking ourselves?
Yes.
Does that make the student display skills and concepts?
Yes.
Or is it strategic thinking? Abstract reasoning. They are having to explain something.
Justifying with evidence.
Justify with evidence. Great, explain this to me. So what do you think? It could be a DOK 3. So look at 4. How did the role of the U.S. Embassy in the Soviet Union and its ambassadors change in the years immediately after the end of World War II, and what was the resulting impact? It's a nice long question.
Three.
Why?
Well, because you have to know the role, and then
Know the role.
you also have to know the result
Mm-hmm. Is that complex?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Like a level 3 complex or level 2 complex?
I think
I said 3.
I think
3? Okay. What about number
You gotta
4?
know all about U.S. and then, so you gotta know a
Yeah,
lot.
I would not be able, that's not my question. What was the name of the U.S. ambassador to the Soviet Union during World War II?
1.
1. You either know it or you don't.
Yeah.
Now, does that make it easy?
No.
No, but it's not complex. It's a DOK 1. You know it. It's a recall. But that doesn't make it easy.
Right.
That for me is hard because I don't know. I don't know the answer. Maybe one day I'll look that up and I'll be able to look like I know. All right. What event led to President Eisenhower recalling the American ambassador to the Soviet Union in 1956?
Well, you either know it or you don't.
You do.
But, is it a 2?
I'm going,
That was a tough one. Is it easy?
You gotta make a connection because you have to know what event led to that.
Right. So there's a sequence of events that happened that led to this thing. I'd call it a DOK too, because it's a little more complex. It does depend on some basic knowledge, and you got to be able to connect those things together. These are two things that happen.
Could that be an opinion? You know, like maybe some people say it was,
That's possible.
you know, this happened.
And if it were written differently, if there were some, if the historians did not agree on, hey, this single event led to, if there were some,
If it was an opinion,
you could rewrite the question and ask the student to give evidence that supports the conclusion that,
then that could bump
or
it.
pick a stance. All right. So another way we can think about depth of knowledge. This is a very long question, and it asks students to do a lot of things in order to get to an answer. And these two students did it, and they got different answers. Do you know what they don't know?
and the answers are
They're totally different.
totally different, like.
So does a student writing this down help you know what they got wrong? Not in the least bit. There's a numerical answer. You were expecting to get a numerical answer. That's great. But I don't know where in all of these things that they were asked to do, I don't know where they went wrong. But think about this. If I ask the questions a little bit differently, I might be able to figure out, great, what concept are my students really not getting? If I take that same question and break it down into some parts, I've got some good questions that I've pulled out. This one starts with, hey, I've got 4 shelves 5 feet long, the cost of shelving, how much would it cost to buy shelving for all the shelves? Now, they still have to do multiple steps. But I've eliminated one of the things, the least amount you need to spend to build the shelves. I'm just asking, how much is it going to cost to buy the shelving for all these shelves? Okay. This is an extra step I've just eliminated, so I can at least start to pinpoint, okay, where are they going wrong? If I really want to sort of tease out the steps, great, construction plan calls for 4 shelves 5 feet long, how many feet of shelving do you need? That's a really simple question for a math student who's doing that math in their class. But I can tell now, are they having problems with multiplying? Are they having problems conceptualizing? Great, 4 shelves 5 feet long, 3 shelves at 4 feet, and 2 shelves at 2 years long. The cost of shelving is 2.45. Where I can tell a little better where their problems might be. Simpler, even simpler. Okay, so I can ratchet up my DOK. Now, I will say, for the record, it is a challenge to find and or write DOK 3 multiple choice questions. That's going to be the hardest part of what you do. DOK 1, never going to be a problem. DOK 2, you're going to want to call some of your 2s 3s because you're having trouble finding 3s. Okay? Just know that that's a thing that's coming. But just be thinking about complexity. It's not always how hard, how complex. And think about all the different ways, especially if you're writing your own questions, how many different ways could your students go wrong? Those are your best multiple choice answers. All right, so now, turn to page 32. You'll see the same image that you have on the screen. We're going to figure out some things together. We're going to look at DOK levels for these questions. All right, so let's take a look at the first piece of art is successful or not. Would occur in the blank step.
Conclusion and judgment.
Wow, and she says that so fast. Wonder why.
I feel like when we wrote this, did we write this or did you write it? I feel like it's when we had.
It could be.
Well, because those are the steps of art criticism.
Uh-huh.
So at the end, you make a judgment, and that
So the expert says that this is DOK what?
1.
DOK
You
1.
gotta know what it is.
But it's in the context of your class and it's addressing a standard, right?
Yes.
It's something important to your class. Now I, having not taken that class, I could guess.
Right.
I'm not going to know because I haven't been exposed to that content because I haven't been in your class. But a student who's been in your class, who's been looking at that standard of significance, ought to be able to answer this question, and that you have taught them the steps of art criticism, because that is something important for them to know with the standard of significance.
So that's a recall.
It's a recall question. It's not recall for the rest of us because we haven't been in the class, but recall for a student who's being exposed to that content. Now, number 2. Photo below demonstrates most clearly which photographic concept?
A, light and shadow, I'm just gonna guess.
Framing, if you put it up the upper left, or upper right corner.
Or that could be rule of thirds though, so I think the correct answer is light and shadow.
So the real question is, do you think it's a DOK 1 or 2 or 3?
This seems to be open to some interpretation.
I think you could argue that it is framing.
Okay, so if there's
You
a,
have to know what they are.
you have to know what they are and
In the,
in order to recognize it.
You have to, yeah, so 2.
DOK 2. Totally. It's not a 3. I mean, you haven't asked them to do something else with it. But they do have to recognize what these things are and then apply it to this new situation.
Yep.
That's take what you know, what you recall, go use it somewhere. This is someplace new.
That makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah.
Okay, and the third one. Which tip would help the photographer improve the composition when reshooting the subject in the same location under the same lighting conditions? DOK 1, 2, or 3?
Well, it's not a recall. It's definitely not 1.
Definitely not a 1.
Definitely
Okay.
not a 1. I almost feel like it's a 2-ish.
Okay. 2-ish. What would make it a 3? What would make you more confident about calling it a 3? She refers back to that matrix.
You would have to
Yes.
come up with how to solve it yourself. How can you make this photo compositionally successful?
Okay.
And you would have to say that. The question gives you the answers. I mean, there's answers here for you to choose,
It's so
so.
tricky, right? It's like you said, how do you make a multiple choice?
A DOK 3.
Right.
Right, you
Okay.
have to give the answer. Ultimately, the answer has to be there, so they can choose it.
So this is like the Wheel of Fortune. Summary for all. There are some really wonderful verbs embedded in the wheel.
I used it when I read rubric too, it was so helpful.
Exactly.
yeah.
Help the photographer improve.
It's one right before it. What about like, well, maybe you are drawing a conclusion because you're deciding that maybe it can be a 3.
You are using some concept of self. It's like a non-routine problem. It seems like a non.
It is non-routine because you are having to use what you know, not only apply it to a situation, but this is one you've never seen before, and you have to be able to choose the best answer that addresses that question correctly.
So it can be a 3.
I'll say a
Are we
3.
kind of shoehorning because we have to? So we want multiple choice
Yes.
for practicality, I suppose, right? So we kind of shoehorning this 3 into a.
No, they're legitimate. 3 doesn't mean you're creating a thing.
See like that one.
Doesn't mean you have to write.
Right, you could.
It doesn't mean that you have to write, but you are drawing some conclusions. Now, your conclusion should match one of these 4 things, because those are the options that you've been given.
That wheel is super helpful.
The DOK 3 construct a response means it could be the same question and you're not given any of these answer choices to choose from. You have to come up with the explanation yourself. You have to recognize what it's asking. You have to know something about composition and the things that would improve it for this item. You have to create that. That would be a DOK 3 constructive response. So if you take away these multiple choice answers, you could, which tip? It wouldn't be which tip. Please explain how you would help the photographer improve. Give a list of steps. Write a paragraph. Describe in detail what you would tell the photographer to do. Would you move the lady? Would you?
Definitely not.
Construct a response.
Challenging question.
I mean, it's typical for a constructive response.
Yeah.
But the student is still having to go through that same kind of thought process. It's just that the answer choices are before them. They have to make the decision of which of those 4 answers that may not be quite where their head was, but one of these is the correct answer. So they have to use their judgment to figure out which one, based on the things they know about composition.
God, it's such a different animal though. The constructive response versus...
In some ways, I think it's still the same kind of thought process. Take a look at the next page. We'll take a quick look at these.
Because it's art too, maybe if you're in your own content area, it'll make more sense.
Right. Sorry, the next 3 examples are about math.
Okay, you lost me there.
I know. We're not trying to answer the questions. We're just trying, how complex is this? We have a triangle, QRT. It's got a right angle. Ooh, there's some stuff that I need to know. I need to know what a right angle is. The measure is 30 degrees less than angle 2. Okay, that's something else I need to do. The measure of the angles are 60 and 30. This conclusion is, now I got to make some choices. Is it a DOK1? No, definitely not. It's not a recall question. We can tell that right away.
I think it's a 3.
So do I.
All the math ones are 3s.
No, the math ones are not 3s. No. I think that number 4, definitely a DOK3.
Yeah.
Multiple steps to get to a final answer. And there's a conclusion that you've got to evaluate, much like this one.
Now some of these, let me ask you, with the Agile Mind curriculum we were using, they a lot of times the question we pick all that apply. So you could have...
Oh, yeah. Those are hard, too.
That's 3, right?
Yeah.
So can we put those on ours?
One single answer. Sorry.
Well,
It's not even it's not an option we even have in Mastery Connect
Right,
to have multiple answers.
yeah, like-
We've wanted that because we had some interesting conversations about that.
Yeah.
So, in number 5, what is the measure of angle N?
I won't say isosceles, so you got to know that the angles are congruent.
So then a 2? Well, okay, it could be a 1, but I would go...
I'd say a 1 depending on the level of the student, but at least 2. Not a 3 though.
Yeah.
Definitely not a 3.
Right.
Okay. In number 6, you look at it and say, ooh.
Find the measure of, really?
Okay, so find the measure of DBC. First I got to find it. I have to know what DBC is. I have to identify it. And then I have, oh my gosh, these expressions that are describing these angles. I got to solve for X somewhere in here. And then I got to do something else with it. I've just had to do 3 things.
Oh, and also they're quadratics.
And yes, and be able to solve quadratics as well.
Yeah.
So now the quadratics, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. So definitely a DOK3 based on the number of steps that are required to get to the end. It depends on some basic knowledge and application of that knowledge. And now we have this unique situation where all the angles just are defined by some algebraic expression. Solve for X first. And good luck. All right.
So
We're getting the hang of it?
a constructive response is based on, when we do a constructive response, the expectation is they should be listing steps.
Not necessarily. We're going to take a look at an actual, this is not an actual assessment that comes up next. If you turn to page 34, that's a lot of words. We're not wordy people, are we? But English teachers love this kind of stuff, right?
Sure they do.
It's good for them. All right. So on the next 2 pages, these are, I'm going to say for the sake of time that we're going to spend a little less time on this. These are practice items, things that you can practice with to identify DOK levels. Okay? The first 2 questions, 7 and 8 there, are about the passage. But notice this continues from number 6 that we just finished, the group of math questions 4, 5, and 6. This is just 7, 8, 9. Again, this is just all practice stuff. We can go over it if you want, but what I will say is that when we get to the next thing, we're going to look at a common interim that's been written just last year as an example of, hey, this is the kind of thing we're looking for now. Some of these items were written, I'll say a little while back. Okay. So, but I will call your attention, we'll take a look at one I will say is pretty straightforward, in number 9 on page 35. Professor O'Neill studies the attentional processes involved when people search for specified objects by measuring the amounts of blood flow to various portions of the brain while the participant engages in a letter detection task. What approach to psychology is he using in this study? Is that DOK 1?
No.
Not
Two.
2. It's not a very complex task. It's not a hard task, but it does require that they, A, know what those different areas of psychology and be able to apply it to this situation that Professor O'Neill is studying.
Yeah, because it's a specific situation, right? Then you have to
Right.
generalize it.
Take that topic, apply it to something else. Take that concept, apply it to something else. That's a DOK 2. Okay. Some of these others on here definitely DOK 3. They require multiple steps of thought process as students are moving through. Okay. All right, if you look at page 37. Page 37, this is an interim that was written just last year. You'll notice the one thing that's missing, and it's just about the way I put this document together. I didn't scan it to do it. I created a PDF. So it doesn't have the header. This is a common interim though. It was written for American Studies. It is, I think it is CIA that I picked. So the header would have American Studies, Common Interim A, student name, for a student to be able to write there. And then the first thing that's there, if you hold that page, and let's go back to the design criteria, the style sheet on page 12. So page 12 and page 37. So you notice all of the font is size 12 except for the part that's in italics. So that's just about the source though. That's not required for the questions.
So this is without the header though, right?
It's without the header, and that's just based on the way that I printed this document. That's all. It is really there in the actual American Studies Common Interim A. But it would have the header, place for a student to write their name, and then it starts with the standards. These two standards are what these next set of questions are on. What do you notice about the passage?
It's smaller and italicized?
Well, the Williams, Jennings, Bryan, that part, yes.
Okay.
That's not a part of the reading passage, it's more about the source,
Oh, I see.
the source of material.
Okay, sorry.
But just below that, they're numbered, okay? So they're paragraphs and or statements that are numbered. Let's turn over, keep turning to page 39. So the item numbering starts at number 1, obviously. First question's a DOK 1. It's not required that you put the DOK there at all. That's,
Do you think that is distracting to the students?
the students won't even know what that is about.
Right.
So it may be distracting to possible. But according to Bryan, what are the primary arguments made for imperialism? It points them back to, what's this passage about? So for the standards they're addressing, that's a DOK 1. Recall from this passage. Number 2, one can reasonably infer. That's a DOK 2. Which piece of evidence best supports the argument? That's similar to which of these answers is the best to achieve this goal? Similar idea for DOK 3. Okay. We turn over, we're now into source B. So it's pointing the student very clearly, okay, new stuff now, something new to read. We get to page 41. Now we're looking at question number 4, question number 5, question number 6. So as we said in the style sheet, item number items throughout the entire assessment. If using sections, do not start with 1 for each section. That makes sense. Number 1, 2, 3, oh, new passage. Number 4, 5, 6. Okay. Then we get to source C. Okay, student, new stuff now. Now we haven't repeated the standards because this whole section is just about those 2 standards. We turn to page 42. Great, we're at questions 7, 8, and 9. And then we get to source D. Great, student, hey, 4th passage now, we're at source D. We turn over to page 44, we're at numbers 10, 11, 12, and 13. So we have 13 multiple choice items. 13 items. And then what happens?
Constructive response kicks in, but is that the same standard that we just...
They are, but you're in a completely different section. So if you have a completely different section, hey, now we're in the constructor response section, repeat the standards.
I don't see that on the style sheet. It doesn't say on the style sheet to list the standards first. Just do it anyway.
I think it's a good habit to do. It was there in, I think, some original documentation. I think it's a good idea. Because here's the thing, the way you can arrange, it would not work for this one, and I'll show you in a minute their answer key and how it's arranged, and this will make a little more sense. So you can take two standards and have them have questions that address one or the other throughout your assessment. I have also seen assessments where standard number 1 is addressed, that's a section. Standard number 2 is addressed, that's a section. So standard number 1 is given, 5 questions. Standard number 2 is addressed, so we list standard number 2, and then we have the next 5, 6, 7 questions. And then standard for section number 3, the constructor response, great, which of those 2 standards are you addressing? Give it to the students, and then there's your constructor response section. I think it's good practice. Tell students up front, this is what this is about. If it's like this assessment where really both standards are addressed throughout, you're just saying both of them are there. If you're separating them, tell the students, all these questions that follow are about this one standard. This particular assessment for American Studies, we're saying to the student, these 2 standards, all the questions that follow are about these 2 standards. Okay?
So anytime we change the standards,
Tell the students.
questions,
Yes.
list it back up there. So
It's fair.
They don't, it is.
It's fair.
Yes, you could just group them together
Yeah.
and relist the one for extension.
Exactly.
Okay.
So now, their lines, who doesn't want their students to, oh my gosh, please write on the line and stay in the space and don't squish it up in the margins? Okay? That's for you and them. Okay? But if you turn to page 47, there's the rubric. Now the students have a guide. These are the kinds of things I want you to address in your response. This is what I'm going to be looking for. I'm the teacher. This is what I'm looking for from you, the student. So the student has this rubric there for them. So your constructor response should give them some guidelines for what you're looking for.
Can you give them this rubric before the data test so they know how to so you don't have to use time to data test to read it?
Or is this something we would have them do in class for prep?
Maybe it's a regular rubric that you might use in your class that's not unique to the Common Interim. I feel more comfortable with that than saying, oh yeah, you want to teach this rubric before you give them the Common Interim.
Yeah.
But the rubric and the constructor response should reflect something that you would kind of normally do in your class. It shouldn't be brand new stuff because you're addressing standards of significance. So this should be a way that you would address that standards of significance in your class. So it shouldn't be brand new, a brand new thing.
So like, for example, in art, it could be something ordered about drawing a 1-point perspective drawing.
Right.
And then the rubric for that could be, your craft.
You want to make sure you're doing all of these things that you would normally be expected to do if this were not an assessment. Because it's a thing that you would do in class normally. So I think if the rubric is designed with that in mind, then yeah, because you're going to use that rubric more than just for the constructor response, for the common assessment.
That's cool.
So is it,
That makes sense?
so these, is it like this rubric is a pretty general thing so that you could use this in other aspects?
This one is a rhetorical précis rubric. It is a rubric that supports this course and its objectives. So is it generic? Yeah, for this course, yeah. Or for another course that involves a lot of writing, rhetorical analysis, that kind of thing, yes. Could it be used for business math? No, probably not.
No, I'm saying, but
yes.
Of course, they might.
They might use this rubric for some other writing that students do. And they are also including it for the Common Interim. That's fine.
Okay, so just don't give it to them the day before and say, all right, this is it.
Right.
But you can use the same
Yes.
one.
This is generic.
But don't-
It can be used for any rhetorical writing analysis.
Okay.
Any. It's not just for the Common Interim.
Yeah.
And presumably they're doing other writing other than just on the Common Interim. Because that's only 3 times in a semester. Okay. All right. On the next page, answer key has a template too. Course title, which Common Interim assessment is it? What are the standards that are used? Write, type, copy, paste the wording for the standards. Then, in the actual answer key, you have items that are numbered. This one has, I can tell, 13 multiple choice items and 1 constructed response item. How do I know it's the constructed response? Because there's no correct answer given. There's nothing in the box. So all of these were multiple choice items. They've been assigned a certain number of points. They have a DOK level that's been identified. So anyone who is reviewing your curriculum and reviewing your Common Interim can quickly see your proportion of DOK levels. Have you met the criteria? 30, 40, 30. Possible answer is given there. Here's a really good answer that would earn the maximum score. It continues on to page 49. So it's a part of the answer key. This is the expert's opinion about what should be there. The rubric should be used as you're looking at this, we'll call it the perfect answer, and what the student has done in comparison with the rubric. Where does this fall? If this one gets the maximum number of points, how does the student meet or not quite meet that standard? But again, you've given that student that rubric, they know what the target is. If they fully understand what they're doing, they may get to that perfect answer. Okay? But again, you're writing this answer for the person who wasn't involved with writing, who is new to the district, who is, oh my gosh, new to this course, taught it 3 years ago, but there's a new interim now. They weren't involved with writing this summer because they were in France. You're writing it for them so they know, so there can be some consistency in how students are scored. Because again, what we want to be able to do is to be able to use this assessment as a formative assessment, to be able to talk about, great, our students collectively, all 552 of them are getting this standard or they're not. Who's doing really well? What are they doing? Because I want to do that, because I want my students to do that too. So here on the next page is what not to do. This isn't an actual Common Interim, but I just want you to turn 50, 51, 52, 53. If you look at the bottom of 53, what do you notice first? It's like Scantron. If you put constructed response as number 7 is in the middle multiple choice, what does that mean for your score? You're going to get that one wrong. That doesn't make any sense. But you're also, think about this from the student point of view. You've been multiple choice, multiple choice, multiple choice. Now I got to write? Okay, look at page 55. What does it say? Okay, and then page 56. Oh my goodness. There we go, starting all over at 1. So you start at number 1. You got to number 7 as constructed response. Student has to switch gears. Now you're telling the student, okay, go back to multiple choice, but it's number 1, it's not number 8.
And that's not going to line up on that.
It's not going to line up. It's not going to line up anywhere. So these are all the, hey, don't do this. Now, most of us wouldn't think about doing this, but you used to be surprised in past years, we had some constructed response questions popping up in the middle of the assessment. From a student's point of view, not good practice. Not the best practice. They're thinking a certain way about these forced choices they're having to make, and then you want them to think critically about responding to an open response question. And then on page 57, we're now at section 3. It's helpful for the student to know. They may or may not read it. You know you have those students that will read every single thing on that page. It's going to be helpful to them. Those that aren't going to choose to read what the standard is, okay, but you've helped the ones that are going to read it. You've helped the person who's giving this assessment who wasn't a part of writing this assessment but is teaching this class now. Okay. Everything you can do to support high achievement is a good thing. Everything short of actually teaching the test. That's not about achievement. Page 59, Melcon rubric. Maybe, maybe not. It's not really, it doesn't really address this kind of assessment. It depends on what the objective is, and since we don't know what standards were addressed in that particular item, number 7, in the middle of the assessment, we can't really say whether this is a good rubric for it or not. Hard to say. Gather your stuff. Identify which standards of significance are going to be the ones for your assessment. Start finding items. Figure out DOK levels. Spend a good time on that. Once you've got that first one written, and you've got the answer key written, you've met all the requirements, I would check in with someone.
Okay.
Check in with a course colleague if you happen to get it done before school ends. Check with myself or Dr. Howard. We're happy to take a look at it before it gets to you've gotten to trying to do more. Okay?
So it's okay if we email it to you? Okay.
Yeah.
Because I want to work on it.
And there's going to be there's a district review team that's ultimately involved in reviewing all the curriculum.
Okay.
And so we have people who, some who worked last year on reviewing curriculum and interims, who are, we'll say, very skilled now, and we appreciate their service. But they are involved in reviewing all curriculum. So at the point that you're ready, we'll assign a district review team member to you. Again, Nicole and I are happy to help with that as well. But they are going to be the primary ones. We're the backup singers for this.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Can we ask who they are, or is it,
Do we know who
do we know who they are? Like,
I know, are you wondering if there are people in your content area? And the answer is yes.
Okay.
Yes. We have people from across multiple disciplines. So we try to connect your curriculum and your work to someone who's going to know something about it. But, because they're going to be the best ones, but everybody's been trained in the same way. They get actually a little more in-depth teaching on how to review. They get this and some for their review. Plus, they've all practiced last year. We may have a couple more new ones, but they'll all be people who have written curriculum before.
What if we get some of these preliminary things finished? Like we do, we write one of the, the common interim 1 or A.
I'm ready to plug in a district review team member right now.
Oh, okay, good. Because I didn't know if you still had to choose those people. There's people that.
We're going back to the ones we used last year, plus we're probably going to post for a few more.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, good. Because I want to get going now.
Yes.
That's why I want to do it now.
Just become a review person and then do your own.
Review your own. No. We'll always pass it off to someone else. All right. Importantly, do not repeat items from things you're giving in class. It's like giving that passage, and you did, and somebody else didn't, but your students are being assessed on the same thing. That's not fair. We don't want repeat items. If you can, it's kind of useful, group the items by standard. In this particular example I gave you for American Studies, really, there were, within the passage, both standards were addressed. But it's because it's connected to a passage. So you're not going to have all the same standard addressed, more than likely. For some topics, from some content areas, it's a little more easy to do that. Within the group, consider putting the easy items first. Don't knock them out of the park with a DOK 3 on their very first question. That's the quickest way to shut a student down. Give them a really hard question first. Yeah, I'm going to get them. We're not out to get them. We're trying to see how they grow over the course of the year. There are some items it's really difficult to tease it away from being connected to 2 standards. We try not to do that, but sometimes it's not possible. But pick the one that's the primary standard that item addresses. What's most important about that question? There are, in Mastery Connect, lots of different assessments from lots of different places. Some are good, some are not. If you go into Mastery Connect and you create a tracker, you can add an assessment and you will have access to, you can search by standard. And you'll pull up all these different assessments that people have shared that address that standard all across wherever Mastery Connect goes. Some of them are good, some of them are not. I would look for, if I were going to use that, I'd look for ones that, hey, this is an item that has been downloaded and or used like a gajillion times, not like once. It was posted 3 years ago and like one person has downloaded it. That's probably not the one you want to use.
Is that in this packet?
It is not. That's tips from Greta, because this is what I did. And again, if you're in a core content area, there will be Certica item bank items available to you, but we'll do a PD on that once we need it. So we want to be able to do that sort of one time. Okay? Yeah, just for core areas. There's really not much there for anybody else. We tried that last year. Okay? In addition to, oh my gosh, DOK3 levels that are multiple choice, DOK3 items that are multiple choice, writing the parallel assessments, a little challenging as well. But once you've done it one time, you have a good handle on how to do it, you'll be fine. We're going to talk about some ways that you can achieve that though. Writing parallel items. Same question, add different text. The best title for this selection is, choose these 4 titles here. The next one, 4 different titles, 4 more different titles, 4 more different, for all the assessment A, B, C, D, E. Okay. What is the highest average temperature in degrees Celsius shown for St. Louis, Missouri? Great, show a different graph. Okay. So maybe it goes from January to March. Maybe the graph goes from March to July. Maybe it goes over from 2000 to 2002. He gives a different graph. Based on the following dot plot, what is quartile 1 of the data set? Great, give a different dot plot, different image. Same question, different image provided that the student then has to make a choice about. So, same question, change something within the text, change an image, change what it's asking about. That's one way to write a parallel item. Another way to write a parallel item. Based on the evidence, what conclusion can be made? Give different evidence. It's like changing the picture, right? How could the photographer, oh my gosh, here we go, improve the composition of this photo? Pick a different picture. That requires improving it in a different way. Change the image, change the information, you've just changed the question. Some questions are easier to do that to than others. You could ask the same question stem but give different details. What type of sociologist? Okay, so I'm in sociology, categorize the elderly as unproductive and they can be replaced with expensive, I don't know. What sociologist would ask something else? And then something else, and then something else, and then something else. So the student has to know about the different areas of sociology, but now you're giving them a different circumstance to think about. So the answer choices would be these same 4 types of sociologists. You just change the circumstance you're asking about. Which colors below create secondary color scheme, primary color scheme, tertiary color scheme? We're at the end of my knowledge now. That's all I got. What is the correct way to do? Yeah, there you go.
I just thought throw that in.
What is the correct way to do something in something? Serve in badminton. Dive in a 5-foot pool. The answer is don't, but that's another story. Do a free throw in basketball. And I'm going to say, first of all, this is probably not a question that addresses a standard, but it is an example of a way that you could make a parallel question. The angles of a triangle are in the ratio 3-4-5. What is the measure of the smallest angle, largest angle, the angle in between? Change it from a 3-4-5 triangle. Change the details of the question. It's the same thing, same standard, same depth of knowledge, we just change the details. Students should still be able to answer it if they have really mastered that standard. Your last page. Is there a way that we could make number 1 a parallel item? Determining whether the piece of art is successful or not would occur in the blank step of art criticism. What could you change about that?
Ask about a different step, like ask about what the description is? Like,
Absolutely. You just change the detail of the question. Same 4 answers.
Another answer.
Here are the steps of the criticism. Which one is this one, is basically what you're asking.
I have to say, I think we do that in the so
That's good.
Amazing. And that's one of the old ones.
That's good. So you got the idea of parallel. Photo below demonstrates most clearly which photographic concept. First thing that comes to mind is to make it a parallel item.
Photo.
Change the picture. That's the easy. That's the low-hanging fruit. Change the picture. And the third one,
But you want to be careful not to change it to up the DOK level, obviously.
true. Still needs to be pretty clear cut. But they are applying these terms that they're supposed to know to an image where there is a clear choice. Clearly, this has to be the right answer. Okay. And number 3, again, the low-hanging fruit is to do what?
Change the photo.
Change the photo.
Put another bad photo in there.
Put another bad photo of a hospital volunteer with a different set of compositional issues.
Come out of her head.
Exactly. She is an emergency. Hello. Okay.
Oh, that's a rule.
What's another way that you could change this question? Let's say you keep the picture.
It's not improving it.
You could come up with different things, like you could zoom in, right?
So you could choose some different answers that would also improve. We're just asking the student here to, based on this picture and these answer choices, which one would be best. You could choose a different set of best things to do. Because there are lots of things that could make this better. And then remember to I try not to take pictures with signs coming out of people's heads or lights coming out of their heads. We try. By all means, have this open next to you as you're writing. This, to me, was the best thing. That and the wheel of verbs, oh my gosh, it was great stuff.
Thank you for those.
Great
so
stuff.
I have a question.
Yes.
And maybe you've already said this. So I'm imagining myself writing these and already know what's in the course. So now we're just trying to wrap up these interims. How about if I just have my documents out? Like,
Yes.
So I'm going to do this here. This one is, here's the picture. Well,
Yes.
I'm going to switch the picture. I'm going to have that be.
Oh, absolutely.
3, this one is going to be question 2. I'm going to switch the picture. And so on up to the 5 tests.
Yes.
I'm choosing to do 5. So that might be like a really efficient way
Yes.
to write a
I'd say if you find a question and you already are thinking about how to parallel it, make a mental note, which you'll forget. Bad idea. Write it down, type it, do something, capture that moment. Because 3 days later, you're not likely to remember that you thought that about that question.
I'm just thinking,
Because you've got so many other things going on.
It's right now.
Right.
So it's like, I think it'll
So-
be so much more efficient.
I want to go back for just a second, and I'll point out one thing. So when you're writing those parallel items though, number 1 still needs to address this standard, and it needs to be DOK 1.
Okay.
So number 1 across all of your assessments, parallel. Let me tell you the advantage for you. Rather than switching these around, what that allows you to do is actually make your item analysis actually useful for you. So in the most recent version of the chemistry interim for PMSA, there was a question. It addressed a particular standard. And that was a question that stumped students. We never thought it was a really hard question, but it did require them to read carefully. Well, students don't really like to do that. And so they would consistently, it got better. They caught on, they're like, oh, I really need to read this question because I kept getting it wrong. But it was the same question every time. It was always number 7. It addresses the same standard across all 5 assessments. So I could always tell at a heartbeat, I'm looking for number 7. Ooh, oh, well, we're getting better. So having the same item, same standard, same DOK across all of your assessments, that's truly parallel and truly useful as you're looking at how students are performing down to the item, not just their total score.
So say
We want their total score to increase, yes, but if you really want to use this for what I think is a very good and noble purpose, and that is to see are my students really growing, are they really capturing these standards that I said are really important, really significant, I want to parallel across all of my assessments.
okay.
one thing you had mentioned, you said hit them with the easier ones first.
Yeah.
So
When possible. So remember, in this particular assessment, American Studies, these first 3 questions were about a passage. They were connected to a passage. So it started out with DOK 1, then DOK 2, then DOK 3. Those 3 questions addressed the one passage. The next passage was 4, 5, and 6. So it started with a 2, then a 3, and went to a 1.
would you recommend doing 1, 2, 3?
Not necessarily, because look at their third passage is 1, 1, 2. Nothing wrong with that, but notice they didn't start with DOK 3 for the very first question of the assessment. And it gets a little harder, and then you got to read something else, and then, okay, we're back to something. Okay.
So not hard. I'm just thinking, so math, you want to do all, do through all, if it's one standard, all the 1s, all the 2s, all the 3s, but that's not a hard, fast rule. You're just,
No, it's not hard and fast,
don't just-
but please don't start with a level 3, DOK 3 question. Don't discourage students from the very beginning.
Yeah.
I noticed as American Studies, people put a level or a DOK for.
And I don't know, I'm going to say that's not accurate.
Yeah.
It's really not a DOK4. DOK4, it may be very complex, but DOK4, that's slipped through somewhere.
Because that's like more.
It's really not a
research.
Right. That's a research project. That's something of longer duration than the time they're writing their response for a common interim.
These teachers are real good.
Wow.
Well, so we're going to say that should be a 3. Let's slip through. Okay. Now, I don't think anyone here is actually revising any common interims. You're writing brand new ones. Okay. So we won't spend time talking about that. But for those who are doing this and you are revising a common interim, lots of reasons why you might do that. A, you recognize, wow, this is really yucky as a common interim. It's not serving my purpose. It no longer meets the expectations that we have now. The items are not parallel. All kinds of reasons why you might want to revise a common interim. So your objective, writers, is to write one that doesn't need revising next year. Follow the guidelines, meet the expectations, get some feedback from peer friends, pay attention to the reviews that you get back, the feedback that you get back from the district review team. You will have a lovely interim in the end that will not need revising next year. We'll call that a goal. A couple of things that I want to, let's go back there. We love you for this. You just can't even imagine. It's a lot of work. But if at the end you have an assessment that really informs you about where your students are and what they've learned over the course of their time with you, that's valuable. It's going to help you identify places where you might need to improve your practice or identify places where students often stumble and prevent those stumbles before they happen the next time around. All right, so we have a little housekeeping stuff to do. This will be for those who are watching this online as well. There are 2 things that I'm going to ask you to do, 2 surveys. One is for the state. So you always get that evaluation form. You fill out the form, and then I give you evidence for your PD. Well, we've put that evaluation part online. So we're capturing the data that way. You will still get your PD form in your hand. But then there's also an exit survey that I'm going to ask you to do as a part of this workshop, just to give me feedback on what went well, what didn't go well, what did you understand, what did you not understand. So it's about 12 questions, I think, on the exit ticket. So I'll have you do those, and I'll point you to that in just a minute. I will open it up for you, but I will be collecting that information as well. So it's not a thing that you have to do now, but it's really likely that if you don't do it now, you might forget to do it. That's a possibility as well. So, but it is required for those who are doing it online as evidence of your completion of this content. So, any questions about anything? And then I'll point you to those things. Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe, so I'm writing this with someone from East, Monique. We have 2 different textbooks. Is that okay? As long as
the resource is irrelevant because you're assessing
right?
standards.
Mm-hmm. And as far as the curriculum, though, it's irrelevant too.
Okay, so you're writing district level curriculum, and we're acknowledging that in 2 of our 3 buildings there are some on, and so what that instruction might look like in your building might differ, but we're still identifying standards of significance that are important for students to know related to your content area.
Yeah.
That's district-wide. Department chairs have spent a good portion of this year working on vertical alignment of curriculum. So here's what English 1, 2, and 3, and 4 should look like across the district. All 3 buildings. Now we're saying that as hey, this is what we're guaranteeing. There may be much more stuff that you actually cover in your course. That's perfectly fine for your course in your building. That's great. But at a minimum, we're going to make sure our kids get this and they master these standards. So that vertical alignment document will also be included, if it's appropriate, it'll be included in your required documents folder in your course folder as well. Does that sort of help?
Yeah.
I know a little bit.
We're designing the curriculum based on the standards we want to cover, not on textbooks we're using.
Right, definitely. I never connect curriculum to a textbook. Textbook is a resource.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter.
If you know your stuff really well, you don't even need a textbook. It's good. The textbook is a resource for students to be able to use. It's for you to be able to point them to stuff. Okay? Other questions?